Good evening and welcome to Words to Action. My name is Ken Gordon and I am your host this week in another exciting episode of a series that challenges each and every one of your minds. We're not here to just have conversation. We're not here to just talk, but rather we're here to challenge your minds. And this week we want to talk a little bit about the Trayvon Martin case. Yes, I know everyone's been talking about it. Everyone has had a whole lot to say about it. But listen, at the end of the day, what we want to talk about is a famous saying that came from someone that is very profound and someone that each and every one of us listens to quite a bit, that basically says if you're neutral in a situation, then you've already chosen your side. And that is our quote for this week. And each week we want to try to provide a quote. And we're going to have the quote actually put back up on the screen for a moment. And I want to go back over this quote with you and for you. And the quote is from Desmond Tutu, and it says, if you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. What has been your position with the Trayvon Martin situation? Have you been neutral? Have you looked at it and said, why is everybody getting so up in arms? What's the big deal? Or maybe like someone actually put a comment on the newspaper today in the blog section that said, if you don't want your young black men killed in the streets, tell them to stop acting like thugs. Yeah, real ignorant comment, trust me. But you know what? That ignorance is out there, and we've got to root it out. We've got to go after it, and we've got to sit down with people and have meaningful dialogue, and we've got to come up with what do we do to move forward. It's not good enough to just let people get away with making these kinds of comments on a newspaper blog, behind closed doors. We've got to address them. We've got to root them out. So today we want to talk about the Trayvon Martin case, and we want to talk specifically not just about that case, but we also want to address the Castle Doctrine, as they call it, the stand your ground law. So this week, the Trayvon Martin situation, stand your ground or know your place. Now, one of the questions that we ask in this whole ordeal is, are there any places in America where blacks just should not go? Are there any places where you need to be afraid to go if you are an African American? Let me share a quick story with you. Some time ago, maybe about 3 or 4 years ago, I was working in Kentucky. And someone said to me, Ken, we like you a lot. But, just for your safety, I'd recommend that you're not here after 7 o'clock. And the exact same thing happened to me in Missouri, up in the Ozarks. Someone said, we like you a lot. You're a great salesperson. But for your safety, don't let anybody find you here after 7 o'clock. Stand your ground and know your place. Was the problem with Trayvon Martin that he just didn't know his place? Was the problem that he was in the wrong place? As Zimmerman said, someone who should not have been there. But what gives the right to some people to be somewhere and for other people to determine that they are not where they should be? But even more importantly, why did this particular case catch the minds and the hearts and the spirit of America, when other situations just like it have happened, but no one has said a word? There's a case that's going on right now in Georgia where a young black man was killed, shot in the back by a 62-year-old Caucasian man. The young man was not armed. The young man had done nothing except been in the house having relations with the man's niece. Why didn't we hear about this? Why hasn't that made the front page? We're going to talk about that today with our two guests. Our two guests today are Brother Osayande, and he is a political activist, an author, a poet, a professor, and the co-founder and director of People Organized, working to eradicate racism. He is a powerful, powerful speaker. He has written over 14 books and has lectured all over the country, to include in Harvard or at Harvard. Brother Osayande, welcome. It's good to have you on Words to Action. How are you?
Very well, very well. Good
excellent, to be here. Excellent. Well, I'm glad you're here. So listen, I guess my first question that I really want to ask you, and this is really before we really go into who you are and what brings you to this place, sure. But certainly you talk a lot about young African-American men in America. You talk a lot about the hip-hop age and how that has impacted the relations that they have with women. You have a lot of very deep and profound books. But before we get into that, let me just ask you a question. Why did the Trayvon Martin situation, and let me just also say that you also held a rally, and you've been very vocal and very involved in this as well, but why did that case, or why has it captured the minds and the hearts of African Americans and the nation across the board?
Well, I think we need to, first of all, acknowledge the fact that the African American community has been the community responsible for why this case has caught on and had such a national attention.
Okay.
Via the social network,
Mhm.
Facebook, Twitter, African Americans began to share the story with each other. And were it not for that fact, this case would not have been on CBS, ABC, CNN. None of these networks have ever saw fit to address our people's concerns in the way that they have done with the Trayvon Martin case.
But okay, so I guess then the question becomes, and you're right, we have a powerful new medium that will help us get the word out.
Right.
But why, for this young black man in Florida,
Yeah.
why this case? I mean, why not the one in Georgia? Why not the one in Colorado where we had another situation? Why this one?
Yeah, I'm not sure I can give a clear answer to that.
Okay.
What I can tell you is that there, as you said, there are a number of different cases. So often the tendency is for us to see this as an isolated incident.
Okay.
And try to dismiss it in that fashion. The fact is that before Trayvon, there were some 25 young black men in that same situation across the nation. Since Trayvon, there have been over 30 different black people, not just young black men, because that's another problem often in our communities, that we tend to think that these issues only occur to young black men. You have a case in New York, in White Plains, New York, where there's a man by the name of Kenneth Chamberlain, elderly black man, in his own home, has some type of medical service where, you know, if you're infirm and you need help, he turns over in the middle of the night. His alarm goes off, sends the signal to the company responsible for them alerting the authorities to come send help to this. He becomes aware that he's sent the alert. They call him in his home. Do you need any help? He says, it was a mistake. It was an accident. I'm fine. The cops come anyway. Well, make a long story short, it ends with the man being shot and killed in his own home.
Being shot and killed.
This is in White Plains, New York. And
this is recently.
That happened in 2011.
Wow.
In November of last year.
Okay.
And the case is now beginning to have some resonance within the New York metro area. But cases like that are happening all over this country right now. And we need to use our social network, whatever mechanisms that we use to see Trayvon's case gain national attention. Our community needs to be on the case in regard to all these other cases as well. So
and you're a professor, so I'm going to refer to you as professor as well. But Professor, is this a matter of being opportunistic? Is Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson and Benjamin Jealous, are these activists being opportunistic in the degree that there's really not a lot here, but it's just an opportunity for them to act like it is and then get some camera time? Is that what's going on?
No. I think that's kind of a dangerous idea. The fact of the matter is that yes, you know, someone can make the argument black people get killed all the time. Why are we making a big deal about Trayvon? The reason is this, that it's not that George Zimmerman shot and killed Trayvon Martin.
Okay.
It's that the state of Florida decided that they were not going to prosecute George Zimmerman for the crime of shooting and killing, murdering Trayvon Martin. That's the critical issue.
So if George Zimmerman would have been picked up, if he would have been arrested, if he would have been detained, we would have no case?
We would not know about this case right now.
Okay. So it's the fact that it occurred and there was no real justice, immediate justice in it.
Yes.
What is the lesson for us? Because now Zimmerman has been obviously arrested.
Okay.
He has been charged.
Right.
End of story. Case goes away, does it not?
No, it doesn't. If you've been following the case, which I'm sure you have, we know that there are a number of concerns still afoot. We know that George Zimmerman is out on bail. We know that George Zimmerman has raised over $200,000 of his own confession. We know that we have a state attorney in Angela Corey who is not the most trustworthy individual. And this is just my own opinion.
Okay.
This
is your opinion?
Yes.
Okay, so this is his opinion.
My opinion.
Okay.
During her conference,
okay,
she went out of her way to defend the Sanford Police Department, a police department that was reckless in the way that they handled the case. Not sending a homicide detective to the scene of the crime, sent a narcotics detective instead, who did not check Zimmerman, but saw fit to check Trayvon Martin's dying corpse.
Okay.
You see, who accepted George Zimmerman's testimony that he had a broken nose.
Okay.
Imagine that. George Zimmerman is there telling the police, I have a broken nose. No evidence of a nose broken whatsoever. This type of lack of forthrightness, this lack of desire to seek justice on behalf of this family that was not notified until, did not find out about the whereabouts of their son to almost 48 hours after he was killed. You see, these are severe problems.
So, but do these problems necessarily indicate racism? I mean, can it just be sloppy police work?
No, again, my opinion is that it absolutely represents racism. And that's something that I think that so often, particularly our generation of African Americans, we are the victims of racist white supremacist action. Yet, that doesn't mean that we're experts in what race is or how racism operates. What I teach is that race is a social construct. There's only one race. That's the human race.
Right.
But race has resonance in our society. Race is social status. And it is a social status that is predicated upon the oppression of African people in this society who are Black. Therefore, what happened in Florida is absolutely a case of the state. And I want to emphasize that. This is about the state. It was the state during the civil rights movement that said, the federal government, we don't want you coming into our affairs and how we treat Black people. We want to be able to treat Black people the way we see fit. Which in often cases meant what? You can't vote. You can't sit in the front of the bus. You can't come and partake in the civic affairs of our community. Et cetera, on and on.
So, and that being the case, two questions really here. Have we as a people, if I can kind of use this monolithically, have we as a people bought into the concept of race, and is there a reason for us to be angry?
Yes, I'll answer the second question first. Absolutely, we have reason to be angry. We've elected the nation's first African American president, believing that by so doing, we would have reached a point in our nation's development where these concerns would no longer be concerns that our community would have to be concerned with. Yet and still, not only has that not been the case, we've witnessed an escalation of attack against African people.
But I got to tell you, and I've said this many times, I believe, because it wasn't just the African American community that elected President Barack Obama, right?
That's right.
I believe a lot of people woke up on the morning after and wish they had a morning after pill because they were like, oh, I didn't mean for him to win. I didn't think he was going to win. And it became a reality that we have seen the backlash from ever since. When in history have we had the kind of disrespect to a sitting president as we have? But let me let you go ahead and get back to the two questions. So you think there's a reason for African Americans to be angry still in America, even though we've made so much progress? And have we really bought into this concept ourselves of race?
No, I would say that, how can I answer that? Yes and no. Yes and no. As a community of people, I would say, when I look at our history, when I look at our development here in this country, there has been no people who've harbored a greater hope in the American idea than Black folks in this country. So on the one hand, there's this hope that we carry with us, generation to the next, that we can make progress. Then we have a circumstance like Trayvon or Amadou Diallo, going back a few years.
And that was the situation in New York?
On and on and on, where we are brutally reminded, that we have not made as much progress as we have believed. And so the reality of race, the reality of racism still remains with us.
So I want to go back kind of a little bit to the case itself,
Okay.
and look at some of the arguments that have been made.
Sure.
So one of the things that they did, which is classic in kind of prosecution, and I know you're not an attorney, but
Right.
we have an attorney coming up
Yes,
next.
I'm looking forward to that.
But is they tried to paint the victim as the person who actually was the aggressor, if you will.
Right.
Does it matter what Trayvon Martin looked like, what he was wearing, whether or not he had a bag of weed, whether or not he had been suspended for 10 days? Does that matter ultimately, or will that matter in your opinion in this case, and why did it come up?
I think it should not matter, but I think it will matter.
Okay.
Because we live in a racist society. I mean, there's no other way for me to express it. Like, because of the
now,
fact,
he said we live in a racist society. That's both of our opinions.
right, very well.
We both agree on that.
Yes,
okay, go
very
ahead.
well. That as we're already witnessing, well, first let me make this statement. Trayvon, if we're going to follow the doctrine, the Castle Doctrine, if we're going to follow the stand your ground as it's written in the Florida statute, Trayvon Martin had a greater, what's the word I'm looking for? Between him and Zimmerman, he had the right.
The greater reason to believe he was.
To be able to stand his ground. He was not the aggressor.
Okay.
George Zimmerman followed him. George Zimmerman accosted him. George Zimmerman initiated whatever we had yet to find out, whether there was an actual fight that took place. But Trayvon was trying to get away. We know this by the evidence of the fact that he was on the phone with a young woman.
Well, even if that weren't the case, and I think that's interesting, if you listen to the 911 tapes,
right,
George Zimmerman clearly says, I'm watching this young man.
Yes.
He's walking towards me, looking at me, like he's trying to figure me out. Okay, wait a minute. Now he's running in the other direction.
Yes, yes.
I mean, that in itself says he had no reason to stand his ground.
That's correct.
The gentleman went the other way.
That's correct.
So why then is George Zimmerman getting so much sympathy? How was he able to raise $200,000?
Again, I would say that has a lot to do with the fact that there are a number of white Americans in this society, sadly, that have a severe problem with viewing black people as justified victims, whether it's of outright murder or whether it's institutional victims of racism. And so in this case, what we're witnessing, and we're seeing this, whole numbers, you had white militias going to Florida to provide protection
for Zimmerman. Right.
And for all, they made it very clear, all white people who would desire such from us. You see? What does that say?
Well, and that's a wonderful segue, because that brings me to a question that I'm going to pose to you based on the books that you've written and based on many of your lectures. So what does this situation, as a result of this situation, what should every African-American family say to their African-American sons?
Okay. I have 2 sons.
Okay.
And what I told them as they sat with me and watched the proceedings of the case is that as parents, we have to make it our duty to not just be concerned about our child's safety, which we should be,
right,
but to also educate that child to that child's history so that they don't walk feeling disempowered. You see, there's a real fear that is present within our young people because of the reality in which they live.
Right.
We have to empower them. And I would say, I would go further than that and say that, of course, we need to be organized. There are forces in this nation that want to take us back in history. I'm like, we need, if we're going to go back anywhere, let's go back to the 60s, where our people were organized,
right,
where we had a sense of mission and purpose about what we are supposed to be doing here in this society. We've bought the lie. We believe that when King was assassinated, that the civil rights movement was over. There's nothing that could be further from the truth. Our rights are as real as we are ready to defend them. And the minute that we step back from that, and we're witnessing this,
Sure.
is the very minute that they will take those rights back from us.
I wrote an article, and in my article I talked about the fact that if you take a look at this situation, I'm not very concerned, and understand what I'm about to say. I'm not very concerned about George Zimmerman.
All right.
Because the truth of the matter is that you can lock up George Zimmerman tomorrow.
Yeah.
But the systemic racism that exists will produce another 100 just like him.
Absolutely.
So to that degree, and I got a lot of I got comments when it went into the newspaper calling me a racist, a race baiter, that I'm the reason, along with Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton, that we have the problems that we do. But talk for a moment about systemic racism and how it creates people like George Zimmerman and protects them.
Going back to what I shared earlier about the concept of race.
Mm-hmm.
So often when we think of race, we think of people of color, black people. The fact is that race as a social construct enters history as a means to empower people classified as white. So in truth, whenever we talk about race, we should be talking about what does it mean to be white, rather than what we often talk about, what does it mean to be black?
Okay.
What it means to be white in a society, and we can chart this in history,
mm-hmm.
is the development of privileges. There are laws in the books. If we went back during slavery, if you were a person classified as white, and I say that with quotations because there were people who today are white who back in the day were not white.
Okay.
People who are Irish,
okay.
people who are Italian.
Okay.
They don't become white in the national history until the turn of the previous century. But back during slavery, if you were white, you had the right, you had by law the right to shoot, to kill an African person. And you wouldn't even have to go to court for that. It would be deemed an accident, you see? And so that idea of whiteness,
mm-hmm.
of the ability to take violent action on people not classified as white and not have anything done to you, that's part of the American story that we don't want to deal with.
So let me take a step out of the American story and take a look at the worldwide story.
All right.
To this degree. I tweeted this a couple of days ago. Why is it that the life of an African-American man
mm-hmm.
means so little, but the life of a Caucasian woman or a European woman is enough to go to war over?
Mm.
Or in America enough to hang someone over or kill someone? Why is the value placed so highly on the Caucasian woman and so little on the African-American male? And before you answer that, let me just say, we could probably extend that to say African-American men and women, Caucasian women and men. But for in this context, I really want to look at the African-American man whose life is valued so little, and the white woman or the Caucasian woman who wars have been fought over, people have been killed over. Why is that?
Well, I think it's about, that's a very complex piece there, because when we're talking about how this society views white women, it's rather sexist. It's rather this white women are this product that has to be protected in this kind of very patriarchal, male dominant kind of way. The fact is that, and I also want to trouble this idea that black men got it harder. Right now in Florida, there's a case of a young woman by the name of Marissa Alexander, if I'm saying her name properly, who is attempting to make use of the stand your ground law. She was in her home. Her husband violently abusing her.
Mm-hmm.
She goes to get her weapon that is registered.
Okay.
Shoots it in the air to say to him, look, you got to back off, man. She's arrested. She's the one bruised. He's not bruised.
Okay.
She's now facing 20 years because of her desire to defend herself, a black woman. And the stand your ground defense, Florida saying she can't use. But in the Trayvon Martin case, George Zimmerman's able to use that. You see?
So is this an African American woman?
Yes. And so the point is that with regard to black people, you see, when you speak to that value, that lack of value, that is a truth that we have to come to terms with as a community. No one is going to take care of us but us.
Right.
And so these divisions that exist within our community, the way we would treat and relate to each other, that has to be addressed in a way that gets rid of that stuff.
So let me just say, I'm glad you brought that up, because I'm going to take a moment for a commercial for Words to Action, because that is absolutely a show that I intend on doing, is how African American males and females relate to one another in our society today, because that bears some looking at, because there have been walls that have built up, whether they have been inserted or whether we have added to them ourselves, where we become our own enemies.
Yes. Sure.
The same thing applies when you look at, probably more so, African American women at one another. When you start looking at issues of color or tone,
Sure.
skin tone, etc. But anyway, I digress on that. But let me go back for a moment. What is the lesson? And I know that the class is still going on, but what is the lesson that America should get out of the Trayvon Martin case?
Well, the lesson for the nation is that racism is real, that the Black community is concerned about its children, that we do love our sons and daughters, and that we will do what is necessary to protect them, and that we seek justice.
Okay.
And the lesson for the Black community is that we have to be organized. One of the things that I'm doing beyond my work in the classroom is, like yourself, I'm in the community. On May the 24th, we're going to be doing an event in Camden to bring people together to talk about the implications of such laws in our own communities.
Okay.
As you know, the Stand Your Ground law is operative in half of the states in the nation right now.
Yeah.
They have some version of the Stand Your Ground law.
Right.
We have to do something about that,
So let me kind of turn a little bit in a bit of a different direction, because one of the things that I hear a lot is, that's an African American issue. What does this case say to other people of color in America, and should they pick up on anything? Is there a lesson for them to learn in this?
Oh yes, oh yes. I have a brother who lives in Arizona.
Okay.
He's married to a Puerto Rican woman. They can't drive down the street in Arizona without worry of being stopped by a police officer who's going to assume that his wife is Mexican, and assume further that she's an illegal immigrant.
Sure. And
that their children are going to be having to deal with this stress and duress from this kind of law that's on the books there. That we know as well, that the whole concern around supposed illegal immigration is a concern that is right here in Pennsylvania, in Jersey. As a community of people of color, we need to once again see the connections that we share as communities that have histories of struggling against all forms of oppression, and unite, recognizing the commonality we have at this time.
And I think it's interesting you say that, because I think Martin Luther King Jr. said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
That's right.
Why is it then that when we walk down these troubled hallways, why don't we get any comrade in arms? Why do other people of color not identify, or do they, with us?
I would say it depends.
Okay.
Certainly there are cases where we could do better. But to lay out the blanket notion that as a principle, Asians don't get down with African Americans, don't get down with Latinos, that's not true.
Well, that might not be true, but I've not seen any Latinos or Asians marching on Trayvon.
Well, no, I mean, I hear you. That's yes, and again, I would say that's an area where we need to do more work. But I have to say this: there's a Latino paper in Philadelphia called Al Dia that put an editorial saying that they were not going to defend George Zimmerman as a Latino around this case. I mean, again, there are pockets where people are speaking to the truth and organizing around these questions.
Well, we only have a few seconds left to go, so I just want to give you an opportunity, just in light of this whole Trayvon Martin thing, what are you trying to accomplish in all of this?
Oh, wow. Again, my answer to any problem our people face is organized. Again, if folks want to get more information about the work I'm doing, we have a workshop coming up next week in Philly. I'll be speaking at a Black Male Development Symposium in Arcadia in a couple of weeks from now. Yes, my website, osayande.org.
And can you spell that really quickly for everyone?
OSAYANDE. .org.
Okay. All right. Wonderful. So we thank you so much for being with us today, Brother Osayande. We appreciate everything that you have done and are trying to do as it relates to not only the Trayvon Martin situation, but also to the situation when it comes to organizing and bringing everyone together. Brother Osayande talked a little bit about the Castle Doctrine and the Stand Your Ground law, and I tried not to take his bait to really talk about that because with us today, our next guest, Patricia Darden, is from the law offices of Patricia Darden, and she has been for a little while, she's a very young woman, but for a little while she has been in the legal system and has done a lot of really, really wonderful things relative to the Abbott case that was that many of us know in New Jersey, and a number of other things as well. And trust me, her bio will be on our website. But let me just go ahead and jump in. First of all, thank you so much, Attorney Darden, for being with me today. Thank you very much. You had an opportunity to hear the dialogue and the conversation between myself and Professor Osayande.
Yes, I did.
A lot of it came and really centered around this whole notion of the Stand Your Ground law.
Yes.
And the Castle Doctrine. So let me ask you first and foremost, can you explain what the Castle Doctrine and the Stand Your Law Doctrine are?
Yes, I can. Basically, the Castle Doctrine came from the premise that a man's home is his castle, and therefore he can protect his home.
Okay.
What the change and the twist was is the issue of deadly force.
Okay.
Historically, human life has been so important that you couldn't use deadly force to protect property, because property was a thing,
okay,
and therefore it wasn't more valuable than a human life.
Okay.
But what these states started to do was to change that law and say that you could use deadly force to protect property.
Okay.
And they began to broaden it even further, because then it expanded beyond the house.
Okay.
It became you could protect your car, you could protect your place of business. And not only could you use that deadly force to protect yourself, but you could use it to protect others.
Okay.
So that's where the danger came in, that deadly force could be used to protect property. The problem is that you have a lot of people who are vigilante types,
mm-hmm,
who probably couldn't qualify for a police force legitimately because of psychological reasons,
okay,
who then began to be able to become armed and became aggressive about that issue of protecting themselves and now their communities.
Okay.
So they have now expanded it, and you have, and I'm all in favor of neighborhood watches.
Okay.
What I am not in favor of is changing from the old time lynchings to making it now legitimate for the people who would have put on the hood to now put on a neighborhood watch shirt,
okay,
and go out and say, I'm protecting the community. They're not regulated. They're armed. They're not supervised. There's nobody who's saying, excuse me, sir, we think you may have an issue because you're always out here following black kids or thinking that they're out for trouble. Police officers have to be trained.
So let me ask you this. So I want to kind of go back to this. The beginnings of it, the genesis of it, was really about protecting the house.
Exactly.
So then this law, does it disproportionately affect one group over another if that's all it's about?
It obviously does. And if you look at what's been happening in terms of the gun lobbies and who's carrying guns and who's carrying guns legally, you will see that that in and of itself is disproportionate.
Right.
And even those people who support Zimmerman will agree that if the color of these two people were just the opposite,
okay,
if this had been a black male who had shot and killed a white teenage youth, the result would have been different from the very initiation of the investigation. And that's where the danger comes.
So I want to cut across you here because there's two things I want to jump on that you just said. Because first of all, so one of the things that I looked at as I was kind of reviewing and preparing is this email that went out from the Citizens Committee for the Right to Keep and Bear Arms. And they are all up in arms about the Stand Your Ground law and the fact that it's under scrutiny. And they're saying, please, whatever you do, protect the rights to bear arms. They have changed the stand your ground to more a right to bear arms.
Exactly.
Are the two connected?
I think they are connected, because when you look at who has the right to bear arms and who gets away with the questionable shootings, because of the way the investigations are and because of the way that the law is applied, that's where you see the inequities.
Okay.
That's where you see that some people are allowed to go around with that gun and then shoot you in the back and say, oh, it's self-defense. How do you say it's self-defense when you shoot somebody in the back? But when you see how the law is applied, who gets prosecuted, who gets arrested, who does the time? So they believe that they are entitled to use those guns like they did in the days of the Wild Wild West. We're going to make our own decisions as to when you should be shot.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because I wrote an editorial and I talked about how it's an interesting dynamic that if you take a look at the 24 states that have stand your ground laws right now, the majority of them are in the South and out West. Is that coincidental?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think so, because I believe that when you're looking at, and I do believe that a lot of these people who are carrying these guns are dangerous, and I do believe that they harbor some racist feelings. What they couldn't do now that they did in the old days, they're doing now legally under the auspices of this law.
Okay.
And that's what you have to watch, is because how do we control our Black folk? I didn't want to say a word that might be inappropriate.
That's okay.
But how do we control them? I have a gun. You're not coming in my neighborhood. You're not walking down my street with Skittles and iced tea. Who are you? Why are you here? I'm going to follow you with the gun. Well, they're doing it that way now. And like he said, the Emmett Till case can show you, shoot somebody in the back now because you were not in my house having sex with my niece.
Right.
Since when could you use that as a license to kill? But then you're going to use the stand your ground law and laws like this that are make-believe self-defense laws that allow you to regulate your Black folk.
Well, and here's what's interesting. So you referenced the case about having sex with the niece and being shot in the back, and that's the Neesmith case that's going on right now down in Georgia.
Exactly.
But here's what I find fascinating about that case. The people in that community have said, well, Mr. Neesmith can't be a racist because he is raising a grandchild that is mixed. So he can't be a racist.
And I guess you can't be a racist because you know some Black people. You know, there's always, I have a friend.
That's right.
And it's funny, when we were watching a show called Survivor, and this guy says, well, I'm not a racist. I mean, a Black woman raised me and fed me and ironed my clothes.
Right.
Hello?
Right, exactly. So what can we do? We have a serious situation that many of us, and I know you probably did, but many of us had no idea about the Castle Doctrine and the Stand Your Ground law. What can be done about a law like that in my opinion, disproportionately affects people of color? Is there anything we can do? The law's on the books.
Well, the law doesn't have to stay on the books. One of the things that we can always do is to lobby to not only repeal some of these laws, but to restrict them. They can be amended. I mean, in New York, for example, even though they have a Castle Doctrine law, you have to retreat, which used to be the standard, that before you used deadly force, you had to retreat. You had to look for another mechanism before you killed somebody. Well, that's in New York. I would like to see New York's law a little bit better, but clearly that law is not as bad as the law in Texas and Florida and some places where you don't have to retreat.
Which right now that's Texas, Florida, Oregon, Washington State.
There's a number of them.
And you're right, they have no obligation whatsoever to retreat in any way, even though they claim they're feeling threatened.
So that's why it's important to look at the laws that are being passed, to put pressure on the legislatures to organize, to say, we don't want this law, we want it changed, we want it repealed, we want it more restrictive, we want proper training. If these people are going to go out and patrol neighborhoods, they should be trained. Who's walking around with a gun that's not trained and hasn't passed any test, but to have money in his pocket to go buy the weapon? That's scary.
It is. So let me ask you this, because I know you've had a lot of interfacing at the governmental and the legislative level, but also you had a lot of interfacing with organizations such as the NAACP.
Exactly.
So let me ask you, what what can an organization like the NAACP or some other organizations like that, what can they do, or what should they do, or what should they, and I forgive me for the bad language here, but what should they be doing?
I think that in addition to lobbying for some changes in these laws, we definitely have to educate our young people more as to how to interact when they come face to face with a Zimmerman or with an officer of the law. And I have done that. I have engaged in training, particularly our young men, because they're most at risk. We're all at risk, but our young black males, they're the most at risk.
Let me cut across you because that's a wonderful point. So for a minute or so, tell me, how should a young African American, male or female, how should they respond and react when they are stopped?
Okay. One of the things, this has been a great area of debate.
Okay.
But I am still of the belief that they should be as still and quiet as possible. They should be very careful when they reach for something.
Okay.
Officer, I'm getting ready to reach for my license. You asked for it. It's in my pocket. They should be low-keyed. The battle about the inequities should be dealt with by a professional or by their parent, but not by them on the dark road at night with no witnesses to say what's going on and what's not going on. And I say to my nephews and my own son when I teach them, don't you engage in the officer about your constitutional rights and and all of these. Don't do it, because you're not going to win that battle, especially with the cell phones. Now, I have young African American men who feel that they could take their phone out and start recording what the officer is doing.
Not a good idea.
Well, they usually end up handcuffed. The cell phone is gone. They usually end up handcuffed. It's a good way to find yourself elevating that situation to an arrest. So it's, you have to talk to them, because this is America. We feel entitled. We have rights. We're free. Well, but there's the limitations on what you can do on a dark road at night with somebody who's out to hurt you.
But by the same token, and I'm going to use a very broad brush on this, most of our young black men are seen as angry, as defiant, and when you get pulled over by police, many of them are even more agitated and irritated. Can you really get through to them the importance at that time? How do we get through to them the importance at that time of leaving that gangster mentality in the back seat and dealing with the here and now?
I get through to them by example.
Okay.
And I try to teach them that what you want to do is to get justice. And you're not going to get justice on that road that night. So you have to give me a situation. If I'm going to litigate, if I'm going to sue a police officer, or I'm going to come after a Zimmerman, you have to help me get the facts that I need so that I can win and get you justice. And when you're screaming to me, well, they put me in handcuffs and they threw me in the back of the car because they told me that I couldn't video and I was trying to video, I'm not able to get the kind of justice that I want to get for you, because the facts begin to change, because you're not outsmarting or outthinking. I want you to use your brains now to outthink that situation and say, I'm going to get you, but I can't get you now. But I'm going to call so-and-so, or I'm going to go to the NAACP, or I'm going to go report this. But don't do it at the spot.
Is the same message, do you give that same message to non-African Americans, to Caucasians? Is it the same message, or is it varying messages?
They're not normally treated the same. And that's the big issue. You don't have to give them that message. They're not going to treat the really cute blonde-haired girl that's been speeding in daddy's car, the same way. I mean, I have nephews, they've been stopped, and the police ask them, where'd you get your car? How'd you pay for it?
Right.
Because you're only driving a car because you sell drugs? Well, my dad gave. Who's your dad? Where does he work? And kids get very defensive. Why are they asking me, where are you going? I was sitting in the back of a car coming from New York, and the officer did not realize that there was an old lady, me, in the back of the car. He just saw two young boys in the front. And we were pulling off to go to a rest stop. So we had slowed down to pull off to go to the rest stop. I'm in the back. So the state trooper pulls him over. And right away, I start hearing the state, where you're coming from, where you're going. Where have you been?
Are
Da, da, da,
those
da.
not good questions? Are they not
Well,
allowed to ask
yeah,
those?
they shouldn't ask that before they give you an idea as to why they pulled you over.
Okay.
You know, they're asking you to engage in a defensive conversation without even telling you why you've been pulled over. The officer put the flashlight, saw that I was in the back, never told him I was an attorney.
Sure.
I'm listening very carefully. They go around and they start kicking the tires. Like seeing whether any drugs or anything's wrong with the tires. And they keep on engaging in the conversation. They said, "Miss, you've been with these boys this evening?" I said, "Yes." And so then the questions began to stop because I was there.
Okay.
We pulled into the rest stop. That same officers started taking their flashlights, looking in the cars of all the parked cars that were parked. And as every minority male came out of the rest stop, the officers approached them and started to question every minority male. Had I not been there, who knows what might have happened.
So what do you say to the people that and again, I don't know if you heard, but one of the comments that went up on the website today when the story about what we're going to talk about today broke is they said, if you don't want problems with the police, then tell your young men to stop acting like gangsters.
Oh, I think that's totally offensive because I don't believe that most of our young men do act like gangsters. But I do believe that they act like they have an entitlement, and they should feel that they have an entitlement, and they should feel that they have dignity, and they should be treated with dignity. But when they're not treated with dignity, you have to teach them how to react to that hostile situation. And it may be, again, as I've said to some of my young men, I'll get you later.
And that's interesting.
I can't get you now on your territory,
Exactly.
on your ground, but I'm coming back after you later.
I find that interesting because it's that concept of fighting fire with fire. And that's not always the way to do it. And I say to my son, I have a teenage son as well, and I say to him all the time, the best way you can get back to someone is outthink them.
Exactly.
And so use your mind, because you can beat someone up tomorrow and the next day somebody who can beat you up will come along. But when you can engage someone intellectually, that's what they're the most afraid of, and that's really where they are. So listen, I know we're running out of time here, but David Chappelle, the comedian, he did this bit one time about being pulled over by police, and he showed what happens when a white or a Caucasian person is pulled over and they're angry and they're cursing at the person, they're calling them names, and the officer really doesn't get that upset. But when an African American does it, then they end up on the ground, face down, hands behind their back, kind of a thing. So ultimately, and I want to get to this real quickly, and then I want to go back to Castle. But ultimately, how do we avoid our young people being in a situation where you're not going to change the police, but how do we change the police's behavior? Because young people are young people; they do stupid things. So how do we change the police's behavior?
There are ways to come after inappropriate police conduct. There's internal affairs. They're not a waste of time.
Okay.
There are organizations, and it's still the reason why I am so connected to the NAACP, because it is still an institution that's here that can have a voice that speaks to community watch advisory boards. A lot of the police departments or municipalities have advisory boards. You have city council meetings. You have to agitate. That's why I don't agree with this issue of whether Al Sharpton has taken advantage of the situation. We need these voices to bring attention to these situations, to put the spotlight on it, so that these things aren't done in the dark and are not kept secret.
So I have about 30 seconds left here. So talk for just 1 second. I want to make sure everybody is really clear. What should we be doing about the Castle Doctrine and the Stand Your Ground law? What should we do?
We should be organizing and advocating for a change in those laws.
Okay.
And we should be making sure that when those laws are on the book, that they are administrated properly. That did not happen in the Zimmerman case. Because obviously he did not follow the directions that the police gave him to leave Trayvon alone.
Yes.
He pursued.
Yes.
So not only do we have a bad law on the book, we have a bad law being interpreted badly.
Absolutely. Patricia, Attorney Darden, thank you so much for being here with me today. And I appreciate your legal mind. And I think you gave a lot of wonderful solutions that we can look to.
Thank you.
And really, at the end of the day, that's really what we're really about. We're really about trying to better understand what kinds of things we can do in order to address the situations that are troubling us. We have a situation right now where we have we had an unarmed young African American man that is dead. He is dead not because he was shooting at a neighborhood watch person who was armed, not because he took out a machete and tried to go after him. He is dead because he was profiled. He is dead because that man, and I'm not going to get into a discussion of whether or not he is Latino or he is white. It is irrelevant. The young African American man was the victim, and that is what we must remember. And so what are the lessons in this? Professor Osayande and Attorney Darden, they talk to us passionately about what we should do. It's okay to engage in dialogue. It's okay to walk around with hoodies on and a bottle of tea in your hand to show that we are trying to have solidarity for the death of Trayvon Martin. But at the end of the day, what do we do? So here are some of the points that came out of our episode today. Number one, we must use the tools of social networking and media to communicate justice to each other. Let's use technology to help drive civil rights and social justice. If you see someone that has been wronged, if you hear a situation of someone that has been done wrong, don't just go sit around and talk about it at your local watering hole. Get on the internet, get to Facebook, get to Twitter, put it out there, let people know about it, pull that curtain back. No longer are people going to be able to hide behind white sheets. No longer are people going to be able to hide behind the darkness of night. We have Facebook, we have Twitter. I bet you they didn't think we'd use it. Okay, but we are, and we will. And it's because of that the Trayvon Martin situation has sparked a nationwide outrage that has focused many of us, like me, onto a doctrine that I didn't even know existed. I didn't even know it was there. That's something that we can do. The next thing that we can do, organize, organize, and organize. And did I say organize? That means that instead of fighting against one another, let's work together. Let's stop putting ourselves in silos and stop trying to say who has a better mousetrap. Let's stop trying to say who is the spokesperson for the race. And let's stop trying to get into a scenario where we think that what we're saying is more profound than the next person. Guess what? I may not be as loquacious as someone else, and maybe I don't use all the big words, but as long as I can communicate the message, that's all that matters. Because at the end of the day, if we don't get organized, if we don't figure out a way, and let me just say this, it's not about organizing the entire race. As Professor Osayande said, race is a construct of what we live in right now. We're all part of the human race. Let's organize locally. Organize your block. Organize your friends. Organize the people in your town. And then organize for something positive. Guess what? When we want to organize to do a bake sale for the Little League team, we can do that. How about organizing because we need civil rights and social justice today? Talk to your kids. Now, in this particular case, we say your sons, but your sons and your daughters. Because the truth of the matter is, as quiet as it's kept, African-American girls are under attack as well. Because people understand that if you can get the woman, she is the one who produces life. She is the one that brings life to the entire race. If you can get to her, you can get to the rest of the race as well. So let's talk to our children. Let's let them understand and know what racism looks like. It's not a person. It's not a group of people. It is a system, and we have got to help identify that system. And don't be afraid to call that system for exactly what it is. And then when we talk about the Castle Doctrine and the Stand Your Ground law, we need to, once we get organized, we need to lobby to repeal and or restrict those kind of laws that are used against us and that are used disproportionately against people of color, not just African Americans, Latinos, Asian Americans, etc. We need to look, we must know, we must use our attorneys, we must use our elected officials, and we must become knowledgeable about what is out there so we know what our game plan looks like and how we can fight. If you follow the history of the NAACP, you understand that one of the reasons that that organization has been so successful is because they got inside of the law and they understood it and they used people who were there. We must educate our young people on how to respond when they are approached. Being a thug, being a gangster, that's never going to work. That is never, ever going to work in any situation. We must teach them appropriate respect. Certain situations call for a certain response, and they have got to know that. In order to survive, we've got to be wise. And then finally, we've got to agitate. If you put your clothes into a washing machine, they'll never get clean unless you agitate them. Put some water on them, get them agitated, pour a little bit of bleach on them, and they're going to get clean. We can't clean up racism without agitation. That is the word for this week. And I'm Ken Gordon, and our words to action is we must do these things. Those are our solutions. So now, we have the solutions, we know what we need to do, so let's move forward and take words to action.